President Lee Jae Myung and his Japanese counterpart Sanae Takaichi meet at the former's hometown of Andong today in line with efforts to maintain the momentum of their friendship and partnership to better navigate a turbulent geopolitical environment. Welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, May 19th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today, President Lee Jae Myung hosts Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi at his hometown of Andong as they seek to promote practical partnership in areas of mutual interest. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, welcome back.
It's great to be back.
I also have Walter Sim with the Singaporean daily The Straits Times joining the session virtually from Tokyo. Walter, it's great to have you here.
Always happy to be here.
Now, Raphael, let's start with you. Let's begin with some of the remarks shared by President Lee Jae Myung during this latest meeting with his Japanese counterpart Sanae Takaichi in the city of Andong.
Yeah, at just a few moments ago, President Lee Jae Myung emphasized the historic nature of this exchange at his hometown of Andong, of course. He pointed out that having both leaders visit each other's hometowns within just 4 months is unprecedented, not just for Korea, but globally, he said. He framed this as evidence of deepening friendship between the two sides and, of course, trust as well. On substance, Lee focused heavily on supply chain and energy cooperation, particularly in light of the Middle East instability and energy crisis at the moment. He referenced the Korea-Japan supply chain partnership signed in March, and he also expressed support for Takaichi's proposal to actually extend that cooperation to other Asian countries facing similar supply chain vulnerabilities at the moment. There were also talks about expanding LNG and crude oil cooperation. I think overall, actually, what I think caught my attention was maybe Lee's careful balancing act on regional stability. He reaffirmed the importance of Japan-Korea relations and also trilateral cooperation with the US, but he also stressed the genuine peace and stability in the Northeast Asia region are necessary and, of course, require all sides, Japan, Korea, and China, to work together, but also respect each other's common interests. So I think that Lee was signaling that the Seoul-Tokyo alignment doesn't mean abandoning engagement with Beijing. And he also outlined his vision for the Korean Peninsula, saying that there needs to be a peaceful Korean peninsula that has no need to fight whatsoever, and that North and South can basically cooperate and live peacefully together. There was also some mention of the progress on the Chosei coal mine DNA testing for Korean forced laborers' remains, and Lee called this a small but meaningful step to kind of solve these historical grievances. So I think the overall message was one of institutionalized shuttle diplomacy, and Lee noted that, again, this is they've spoken or met together 4 times in 7 months, and this proves that the format does work.
Right. Walter, I wonder, what remarks by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi caught your attention?
Right. Rather than specific remarks per se, I kind of feel like the glimpse into her personality during her remarks in closing, when she kind of said that there being no time difference, the two leaders can call each other at any time and talk things out if they encounter any issues or problems, including with other countries, kind of shows a glimpse into how she values the genuine friendship that she has forged with President Lee Jae Myung. And as Raphael did mention, it's obviously very meaningful that they are already meeting 4 months after they met in Prime Minister Takaichi's hometown in Nara, this time in President Lee's hometown of Andong. And Ms. Takaichi also said that she already looks forward to their next encounter and bringing Mr. Lee to a beautiful, maybe hot springs town in Japan the next time. And so, yes, we have established how important it is to sustain this positive momentum, especially at a time of geopolitical turmoil. And I think what the two leaders have shown today is that Japan-South Korea relations can be this beacon of stability in Asia and maybe even the world as the two countries cooperate in a whole range of areas, be it from critical minerals to even combating organized crime. And what I think was very unique this time round is how Takaichi effectively enlisted South Korea as a partner towards achieving Japan's vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. As Raphael mentioned, I think it's very symbolic that the two countries talked about working together, including with ASEAN through their cooperation in the $10 billion Japan-led Power Asia framework that Ms. Takaichi mooted in April. And this would help ensure Southeast Asia's energy security and help ASEAN secure oil. And I guess the bigger implication of this, of course, is that, whether this could just be the first of a series of initiatives led by the two countries going forward in terms of aid diplomacy.
Right. And in the meantime, then, Raphael, to what extent is this latest summit more about maintaining the momentum of summit exchanges rather than focusing on a specific agenda of sorts, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a live debate to be had on this. This is shuttle diplomacy becoming routine rather than event-driven. And some analysts argue that that's precisely the point. After decades where we had Seoul and Tokyo summits only happening when there was maybe a crisis or a need for crisis management, having the leaders actually meet together in each other's hometowns every few months, I think definitely represents a structural shift. The January Nara summit set a pattern for broad discussions on economic issues, security issues, supply chains, regional cooperation. Maybe some people may say that there were few deliverables at the time, but maybe that's precisely the point. Some have assessed that the move goes from conflict management to comprehensive cooperation, which might sound grand on paper, but basically means that they're here to talk about anything and everything. Everything's up for grabs, whether it's AI, aging population, low birth rate, not just historical grievances that tended to be the pattern in the past. That, of course, has attracted some skepticism and criticism. An opposition politician and lawmaker, Jong Hee-yong of the People Power Party, mentioned these risks and said that, well, performance is okay, but what about, what's the substance, especially given that there are elections in a fortnight in Korea. So, of course, there are some concerns that if these meetings don't produce any tangible outcomes on trade, energy, cooperation, and security and whatnot, then maybe this goodwill may run thin. And so some might say that this is a political stunt. Personally, I might disagree slightly with those views, but I think the counter-argument for supporters is that this is institutionalizing the relationship itself. I think that in itself is the agenda, making shuttle diplomacy predictable and expanding also beyond kind of the central government. The fact that this is not being held in the Blue House, like having these lavish ceremonies in the typical places. Here in the regions, cooperating with local governments and also bringing maybe business leaders as well to both sides. So these exchanges are expanding not just at a capital level, but throughout the two countries.
Right. Walter, there are some analysts who speculate that the talks this time between Seoul and Tokyo behind closed doors were likely focused on regional security. This is in light of Mr. Trump's remarks about weapons sales to Taiwan. First, do remind us about those remarks by Mr. Trump, and what have you been hearing on the ground there in Tokyo with regard to Washington's perhaps reliability as a security partner to Tokyo and Seoul?
Right. Well, Mr. Trump did describe Washington's pending arms package to Taipei as, and I quote, a very good negotiating chip. And he also told Fox News after his visit to Beijing that he was not looking to travel 9,500 miles to fight a war over Taiwan. And as such, I think comments like these arising from Mr. Trump's recent trip to Beijing are being felt. The ripples of such comments are being felt very strongly in Tokyo. And I think this has really unnerved Japan, even as, Ms. Takaichi has sought to calm all these anxieties by saying that she did receive a very detailed explanation from Mr. Trump of his visit to Beijing, that the US-Japan alliance remains unwavering and ironclad. But still, such comments kind of shows a line of thinking that Mr. Trump is more than ready to use geopolitics as leverage, and that has set off major alarm bells, especially given, well, the predilections of Ms. Takaichi's administration towards Taiwan. But I also think it must be said that these worries are not exactly new, and it's because such worries exist that have driven Japan's recent efforts to, among other things, upgrade the free and open Indo-Pacific vision to engage more of Southeast Asia. And this unpredictability would also have the unintended result, I think, of pushing Tokyo and Seoul closer in terms of multifaceted security cooperation. And so I think this more self-reliant, this more coordinated architecture would be beneficial for both countries if Washington proves to be transactional. And of course, we are all hoping that this would not be Washington would not be as transactional as people might expect. And I do think that this, as Raphael did mention earlier, is a major paradigm shift, because it was not too long ago that the two countries were really at loggerheads with each other over a whole range of defense-related issues.
Right. Simply speaking, Raphael, do you suppose the Trump administration's foreign policy is indeed pushing its traditional allies like South Korea and Japan closer together?
Yeah, I think it does, though not quite in the way that Washington might prefer. Trump's transactional approach, as Walter has pointed out just now, creates, I think, enough uncertainty that Seoul and Tokyo have found common cause in hedging their bets. When your security guarantor treats alliances as protection rackets requiring payment or whatnot, you start building redundancy. And, even just as of late, Japan, I think, essentially wanted Trump to back them fully against China. But now we see Trump visiting Beijing the other day, and Trump seems to be maybe more interested in cutting deals with Beijing rather than picking fights. So that's left Tokyo, I think, scrambling to basically bring closer ties together with its other partners and alliances in the region, be it Seoul, Canberra, or other regional partners. So I think right now we're definitely seeing this kind of alliance diversification or deepening within the region, if you will. And for South Korea, there are similarities, I think, in the calculation, maybe a little bit more distinct. President Lee Jae Myung's government has been careful to maintain robust ties with the US, while also deepening cooperation with Japan on supply issues, technology, and even preliminary defense cooperation. There was the joint fact sheet that was signed during the APEC summit last year, both countries talking about the trilateral framework, but I think there's also clearly some bilateral momentum that exists kind of independent from the US. Of course, the irony is that the Trump administration is pursuing this America first rhetoric, again, has maybe inadvertently done what decades of patient alliance management has struggled to achieve. And it's basically made Seoul and Tokyo perhaps come closer together and realize it's not just a world in a US-led system, but they can also be autonomous actors. And I think perhaps Tokyo and Seoul might be comparing notes at the moment. They're going through the same struggles, whether it's these kind of burden-sharing concerns with the US, whether it's tariffs or whatever. I think there's this shared experience that they're navigating, and it wouldn't surprise me if behind closed doors we see maybe Lee and Takaichi discussing how they are dealing with their relationship with the US. So I think, let's see whether this cooperation deepens into something more structural or whether it's something that just remains tactical on the surface.
Walter, with regard to Washington's alliance with Tokyo, you recently covered talks between Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and Mr. Trump following his summit with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Beijing, of course, last week. Could you tell us a bit about your coverage?
Right. So, 4 hours after Mr. Trump boarded Air Force One to return to Washington after his summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, he made this 15-minute phone call to Ms. Takaichi, which I think is very important and pivotal and reassuring Japan and kind of calming Japan's nerves, especially after it came after an apparent snub. It has been widely reported in Japanese media that Tokyo tried to convince Mr. Trump to do a stopover before going onwards to Beijing so that to compare notes and ensure that both allies are on the same page with regards to geopolitical issues, despite Ms. Takaichi having just recently made a trip to Washington herself in March. And I think this kind of shows Japan's thinking that, it does not want, it wants a seat at the table, it wants its voice to be heard, it does not want Mr. Trump to trade away Japan's security just to make a deal, just to make a grand bargain with Beijing, especially after Mr. Trump did talk about this idea of a G2 world. So Japan kind of fears being left out in the cold and in what it sees as a sign of Japan passing that refers to this idea of this anxiety that Japan might be overlooked and sidelined globally in terms of its statecraft. And it is in this regard that Mr. Trump's call with Ms. Takaichi, I believe that she is the first, if not one of the first world leaders he spoke to after his talks with Xi went a long way towards easing Japan's fears. And Ms. Takaichi did imply that Mr. Trump spoke up for Japan during his talks with Mr. Xi, and that kind of symbolizes the strength, or I think, of the Washington-Tokyo alliance, especially after Chinese-Japan ties have been on the tailspin since November when Ms. Takaichi said what she did in the Diet, that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan might provoke a Japan intervention.
Right. And Raphael, I believe President Lee Jae Myung also spoke with Mr. Trump following his summit with Xi Jinping. This talk took place, I believe, this past Sunday. What has been disclosed about that phone discussion?
Sure. So, yeah, the call happened late on Sunday night and it lasted approximately 30 minutes, actually. And this call was requested by Seoul specifically to hear about the US-China summit that had just wrapped up in Beijing. So according to a Blue House readout, Trump briefed Lee on the Beijing talks covering the US-China relations broadly, the economic and trade agreements reached, and discussions on the Korean Peninsula and the Middle East. On Korea-specific issues, both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to implementing last year's joint fact sheet from the Gyeongju APEC summit. There was also a discussion on the Korean Peninsula with Trump apparently reiterating that the US would continue playing a role in maintaining the security and stability of the Korean Peninsula through coordination with Seoul. The Middle East did come up in the talks, and President Lee praised Trump's diplomatic efforts, I believe his leadership, and expressed hope that there would be peace and stability in the Middle East. And they also agreed, in practice to meet once again at the G7 summit, which will take place mid-June in France. Perhaps, I think, if we look at the timing of this, or maybe the optics, this call came at Seoul's request. So I think this shows how carefully Seoul is tracking the US-China dynamics and relationship. There's an awareness, I think, that when Washington and Beijing are talking about Korea, then Korea needs to be there and needs to know what was going on or what was discussed at the table. So I think right now there's definitely alliance maintenance, but also I think definitely strategic positioning happening at the moment.
Right. Walter, meanwhile, leading up to this latest summit here in Andong, what aspects of the Seoul-Tokyo ties have been making headlines there in Japan in recent times?
Well, it has been very multifaceted, and looking at positive people-to-people ties, the Yomiuri newspaper reported, I think it was yesterday, that Seoul National University is looking to take in more Japanese students. And it was reported today that Uniqlo will be opening a flagship store in Myeongdong, which shut during the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe. Beyond that, looking at geopolitics, there has in fact been some attention on, I think, the potential composition on the defense industry, especially since Tokyo has recently eased its restrictions on the export of lethal weapons, although I do think that such concerns might largely be misplaced, at least in the short term, given that Tokyo has years to go before it can catch up with Seoul in terms of its defense industrial strength, and Tokyo has tacked on a host of conditions for exports. So I think any anxieties of like real competition might at least not be warranted in the short term.
Right. Reports about Japan's easing of its arms exports did make quite a bit of headlines here in South Korea as well. Walter, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. As always, thank you, my friend, for your thoughts and time.
My pleasure.
Right, and here in the studio, Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Join us again same time tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you for watching.